FAURE Gnassingbé had been the leader of Togo for a very long time. Many people in the country had hoped for change, but year after year, his government stayed in power. At first, some thought he would bring progress, but soon it became clear that things were not getting better. Many people were struggling to find jobs, and life felt harder for the average citizen. People were unhappy, but they were careful about what they said because speaking against the government could bring serious trouble. For almost 2 decades, FAURE's family had held on to power. His father had ruled before him, and now he was, continuing the same way. This made many citizens feel like they had no voice, no chance to change how their country was run. Schools and hospitals did not get enough support, and many young people felt like they had no future. The country's economy was weak, and the government seemed more interested in staying in power than helping its people. Despite this, at first, many people were afraid to speak out. The government had security forces that watched and controlled those who showed any sign of protest. People who protested were sometimes arrested or faced harsh punishments. So for years, many simply kept quiet, hoping things might improve quietly. But the anger and frustration grew deeper inside the hearts of the people. In towns and villages across Togo, families talked about how hard life was. Young people especially felt frustrated. They saw no opportunities for work, education, or a better life. Many wanted to leave the country to find a chance somewhere else. But those who stayed felt a deep sadness and anger about what was happening. They began to whisper about the need for change. They started to meet in small groups, discussing ways they could stand up for themselves. Social media played an important role. Even though the government tried to control information, many young Togolese used their phones and computers to share news and stories about what was really happening. They talked about corruption, unfair treatment, and the need for fairness. Slowly, more people started to join the conversation. The government tried to block some sites and messages, but it was difficult to stop the spread of ideas. The turning point came when an opposition leader, who was popular among the people, decided to organize a peaceful protest in the capital city, Lomé. This leader had long been calling for fair elections and respect for human rights. Many people supported him and were ready to stand together for the future they wanted. On the day of the protest, thousands gathered in the streets, holding banners, and singing songs about freedom and justice. At first, the protest was calm and peaceful. People marched and chanted without violence. They wanted the world to see their desire for change. But the government saw this gathering as a threat. Soldiers and police were sent to stop the protest. Suddenly, the mood changed. The peaceful crowd was met with force. Tear gas was used and some people were arrested. The popular opposition leader was taken away by security forces. This act angered the people even more. News of the arrest spread quickly through the city and across the country. Instead of ending the protests, it made the crowds grow larger and louder. People felt that the government was not listening. They shouted even more strongly for freedom and fairness. Streets filled with thousands of voices demanding that FAURE Gnassingbé step down and allow a new government that would represent all the people. The atmosphere in Lomé became electric. It was clear something big was happening. Families who had stayed inside their homes for years now joined the protests. Shops closed, and life in the city slowed down. The people were no longer afraid. The energy in the air was powerful. Hope mixed with determination. The protests spread to other cities and towns as well. More and more citizens took to the streets, asking for change. Even among the soldiers, there was confusion. Many of them had grown up in Togo and understood the pain of their fellow citizens. They had been ordered to control the protests by force, but now they saw the real reason behind the anger. Some soldiers started to question their orders. Secret meetings happened inside army camps. Younger soldiers spoke quietly about whether it was right to fight their own people or to protect a government that many believed had lost its way. The people watched closely, hoping for a sign that the military would not use violence against them. Days passed, and the protest did not stop. The government seemed unsure how to respond. FAURE Gnassingbé appeared on television, calling for calm, but many believed his words were empty. The trust between the leader and his people was broken. Families sat by their radios and phones, sharing news from one another. They waited anxiously to see what would happen next. Would the government continue to fight the people? Or would change finally come? The country held its breath. On the streets, chants of "Enough is enough" became the anthem of the movement. Banners with messages like "Freedom for Togo" and "Justice Now" were everywhere. People from all walks of life, students, workers, farmers, and teachers, stood united. The protest was no longer just about politics, it was about hope for a better life for all Togolese. In this moment, the people of Togo were showing the world their courage. They were demanding respect, dignity, and fairness after years of silence. The long wait for change was coming to an end. What had once seemed impossible was now becoming real, a movement that could reshape the future of the nation. Inside the Togolese military, things were not as calm as they seemed on the surface. The soldiers had always been expected to follow orders without question, but now many were feeling confused and unsure. They had grown up in Togo, just like the people who were protesting. They knew their families and neighbors were suffering, and they were beginning to understand why the people were angry. It was not an easy time for the army. The military had always been loyal to the government, and for years they helped keep things in order. But now the orders they were receiving were different. They were being told to stop the protests, sometimes by force. Some soldiers were uncomfortable with this. They did not want to hurt the people they lived among. Many of them were young and had joined the army hoping to protect the country, not to fight against its own citizens. Within the army camps, the soldiers talked quietly about the situation. They shared their worries and fears. Some said that they felt like they were caught between two worlds. On one side, the leaders who gave orders, and on the other, the people who were asking for a better life. This was a difficult place to be. Some soldiers wanted to find a peaceful way to help the country move forward, but others still believed in following the chain of command, no matter what. A group of younger officers began to meet secretly. They spoke about the possibility of change and how the military could play a different role. Instead of stopping the protests, maybe they could support the people's call for fairness. They talked about protecting the country's future, even if it meant standing against the current government. This was a bold idea, but one that many in the military started to consider. One important figure in this group was a respected colonel who had served for many years. He was known for being quiet and thoughtful, but also for having strong values. The colonel had watched as the protests grew and saw how the government was losing support. He believed that the army should be on the side of the people, protecting them rather than controlling them. His leadership gave the group courage. As days passed, the tension inside the military camps grew. Some soldiers still wanted to follow orders exactly, worried about what might happen if they did not. Others were ready for change, wanting to show loyalty to their country in a new way. This division was not spoken about openly, but it was clear that a decision was coming. The soldiers outside the city also noticed the unrest. Some began to question their role and whether they should stay loyal to a government that seemed to ignore the needs of the people. Soldiers are part of the community, and they shared the hopes and dreams of their fellow citizens. The idea of turning against their own people felt wrong, but so did supporting a leader who had ruled for too long without listening. One night, the colonel and the younger officers met again. They planned carefully and quietly. They decided they would take a stand, but only if it meant avoiding violence and protecting civilians. Their plan was to move toward the presidential palace, not to fight the people, but to show that the army would no longer be used to suppress the voice of the nation. This plan was risky. If they failed, they could be punished, or worse. But the group believed that something had to be done. The people's anger was growing, and the government's power was weakening. It was time for the army to choose its side. In the days before the action, soldiers prepared quietly. They shared information with protest leaders, reassuring them that the military was on their side. The streets remained full of protesters, but there was a new hope. Many knew that the soldiers would not attack them anymore. The mood in the city shifted from fear to cautious optimism. On the morning when the soldiers decided to act, The atmosphere was tense but calm. Protesters gathered near the presidential palace ready to witness history. When the gates opened, it was not the protesters who broke through but the soldiers themselves. The armored vehicles rolled in, but they carried no weapons ready to fire. The soldiers were careful, making sure not to cause harm. The palace guards, who had been loyal to the president, were surprised. They did not resist because they knew the army was changing sides. The people watched in silence as the soldiers entered the heart of power. There was no shouting, no fighting. It was a quiet takeover, one full of meaning. Inside the palace, FAURE GNASSINGBÉ was caught off guard. The soldiers surrounded him, but their tone was serious, not violent. They told him that the country had changed, and it was time for him to step down. The president knew he had lost the support of his army and his people. There was no way to hold on to power anymore. The colonel who led the soldiers spoke calmly with FAURE. He offered a chance for a peaceful resignation. The message was clear. The country wanted a new beginning without bloodshed. FAURE faced a difficult choice: fight and risk chaos, or step aside and allow Togo to heal. In this moment, the power that had ruled Togo for so long was ending. The soldiers had chosen the people over the regime. They showed that the military could be part of the solution, not just a tool for control. The people outside the palace felt hope rising in their hearts. They understood that this moment was the start of something new. The decision made by the soldiers was not just about power. It was about respect for the people and for the future of the country. The military's choice helped avoid violence and open the door for peaceful change. This act of courage inspired many across Togo and beyond. As the soldiers took control of the palace, the streets filled with news of what was happening. People cheered quietly, not yet fully believing that the revolution had reached this point. Families gathered in their homes, watching the events unfold on their phones and radios. They felt relief, but also knew that the work ahead would be difficult. The following hours, the soldiers communicated with protest leaders to coordinate the next steps. They promised to protect civilians and to help create a transition that would respect the people's wishes. The atmosphere was still uncertain, but there was a clear sense of possibility. For many in Togo, this was a moment of great pride. They saw the courage of the soldiers who chose to stand with the people, risking everything for the future of their nation. The army, once feared as a force of repression, had shown that it could be a protector of freedom and justice. This event marked the beginning of a new chapter. The country had taken a step toward healing wounds that had been growing for years. The soldiers' decision was a reminder that change can come not just from the streets, but also from within the institutions that shape a nation. In the days to come, Togo would face many challenges, but the peaceful action of the soldiers gave the people hope that the future could be different. It showed that when courage meets hope, even the hardest problems can begin to be solved. The morning light poured over Lomé, the capital city of Togo, as thousands of people gathered near the presidential palace. The air was thick with tension and hope. For many years, the palace had symbolized power and control, held tightly by FAURE GNASSINGBÉ and his government. But today, everything was about to change. As the crowds waited, they could hear the low rumble of armored vehicles approaching. But these were not the machines of war they feared. Instead, the soldiers inside were those who had decided to stand with the people. The city fell silent, watching carefully. When the massive gates of the palace opened, the protesters did not rush forward. Instead, they stepped back, watching as soldiers calmly and carefully entered the grounds. There was no chaos, no fighting. The soldiers moved with purpose, but also with respect. This was not a battle, it was a peaceful takeover. Inside the Kiui palace walls, FAURE GNASSINGBÉ faced a reality he could no longer avoid. His guards looked tense, but the soldiers who had come were firm. The president was surrounded, but not by enemies wanting to harm him. Instead, they wanted him to understand that his time as leader had come to an end. For years, FAURE had held tightly to his position, refusing to listen to the calls for change. But now, with the army withdrawing its support, he realized that Continuing to rule would only bring more suffering. The people were united. The soldiers had chosen sides, and the world was watching. The colonel who led the soldiers spoke quietly but firmly with FAURE. He told him that the country was ready for a new beginning and that it was time to step down peacefully. The president sat silently, thinking about what this would mean for his family, his future, and his legacy. Around the palace, the crowds waited anxiously. News had spread quickly. Something important was happening. Families held hands, and young people looked at each other with hope shining in their eyes. This moment was not just political, it was deeply personal. For many, it was the chance to live without fear, to dream of a better future. FAURE GNASSINGBÉ took a deep breath and made his decision. He agreed to resign. It was not easy, but it was the right choice. The president understood that peace was more important than power. He took a pen and signed the resignation papers. This simple act changed the course of Togo's history. When the news was announced, the crowds outside the palace erupted in quiet celebration. People smiled and hugged, tears streaming down their faces. It was a moment of relief and joy. The long fight for freedom had reached a turning point, and for the first time in many years, the future looked bright. The soldiers helped the president leave the palace safely. There was no violence, no anger. Instead, there was respect for the office and for the nation. The peaceful transition showed the world that change could come without bloodshed, without destruction. Outside, celebrations spread through the streets of Lomé. People danced, sang, and shared food with neighbors. For days, the city was alive with joy. The revolution had not been about revenge. It was about hope, healing, and unity. As the initial excitement settled, the country faced new challenges. The army announced the formation of a temporary civilian military council to help guide Togo through this transition. They promised to respect the people's wishes and to organize fair elections. The council's role was to rebuild trust and prepare the nation for a democratic future. Citizens watched the council carefully. Many were hopeful but also cautious. They remembered past promises that had been broken. They knew that change would not be easy, but they were ready to work for it. The people's voices had been heard, and now they had to ensure those voices shaped the future. Journalists returned to Togo after years of censorship. Newspapers printed stories about the revolution and the hopes for tomorrow. Reporters interviewed people from all walks of life: young activists, teachers, farmers, and former political prisoners. Their stories painted a picture of a nation ready to heal and grow. Many Togolese who had left the country during difficult times began to come back. They brought new ideas, skills, and energy. They wanted to help rebuild schools, hospitals, and businesses. For the first time in years, there was a real sense of possibility. Despite the joy, the road ahead was filled with work. The nation needed to rebuild institutions, repair relationships, and heal old wounds. The truth about years of injustice had to be told, and those responsible had to be held accountable. The country needed to move forward, but without forgetting its past. Leaders of the new government promised to respect human rights and to create opportunities for all citizens. They pledged to listen to the people and to build a society where everyone could have a voice. Schools would teach about freedom and democracy. The economy would be rebuilt to support families and young people. The soldiers who had taken a stand were celebrated as heroes, but they also remained humble. They knew their role was to protect peace and support the people, not to seek power. They worked with the council and communities to keep order and help with rebuilding efforts. Across the country, the spirit of the revolution lived on. Communities gathered to discuss their hopes and plans. Artists created songs, paintings, and poems about freedom. Teachers encouraged students to dream big and believe in their country's future. International leaders and organizations offered support to Togo, promising aid and advice to help the nation rebuild. They recognized the courage of the Togolese people and their army in choosing peace over violence. The world watched closely, hoping this peaceful revolution could be a model for others. For many in Togo, the revolution was not just a political event, it was a new beginning. Families who had lived in fear now looked forward to a future of freedom. Young people who had felt hopeless now dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, and leaders. The nation had been tested, and it had shown strength. FAURE GNASSINGBÉ's resignation was a symbol that change was possible. It showed that even long-held power could end when the people and their protectors stood together. The peaceful storming of the palace was a moment that would be remembered for generations. But the true test was just beginning. The people of Togo knew they had to stay united, keep their voices strong, and work hard to build the future they dreamed of. They understood that freedom came with responsibility, and that they all had a role to play. As the sun set over Lomé that day, the city felt alive with hope. The peaceful revolution had opened a door. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And for the first time in many years, the people believed that their country could become a place of justice, peace, and opportunity. After FAURE GNASSINGBÉ stepped down, the atmosphere in Togo was filled with cautious hope. People were excited but also aware that real change would take time and hard work. The peaceful revolution had shown that the citizens and the soldiers could work together for a better future. But now the task of rebuilding the country began. The temporary civilian military council took charge of running the government. This council was made up of respected soldiers and civilians who promised to listen to the people and prepare Togo for free and fair elections. Their main goal was to create stability and trust in the government after years of tension and distrust. 1. Of the first challenges was to bring together the different groups in society. For many years, people had been divided by politics and fear. Now the council wanted to heal those divisions and help everyone feel included. They organized community meetings all over the country where people could speak openly about their hopes and concerns. These meetings were important because they gave citizens a chance to share their ideas and be part of the rebuilding process. Schools reopened with new teachers and new lessons focused on democracy, human rights, and the value of freedom. Young students learned about the revolution and how their voices had helped change the nation. The hope was to raise a generation that would protect freedom and prevent history from repeating itself. At the same time, the council worked hard to rebuild the economy. Many people had lost their jobs during the years of unrest, and the country's resources were limited. The government invited international experts to help create plans for new businesses, farming programs, and infrastructure projects. They focused on creating jobs and supporting small companies so that families could earn a steady income. Farmers, who made up a large part of the population, received support through better tools and seeds, allowing them to grow more food. This helped improve nutrition and reduced hunger in many rural areas. The council also invested in healthcare, rebuilding clinics and training new doctors and nurses. This was essential because many people had suffered due to a lack of medical care during the years of conflict. One of the most important but difficult tasks was addressing the past. The government created a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This group's job was to listen to the stories of those who had been hurt or treated unfairly. It provided a safe place for victims and even former officials to tell what happened during the years of hardship. The goal was to find the truth, promote forgiveness, and make sure that justice was served where necessary. Many families who had lost loved ones or faced imprisonment found some peace through the Commission's work. Though it was painful to remember, this process helped the nation heal. The Commission also recommended changes to laws and institutions to protect human rights and prevent abuses in the future. The Council encouraged the media to be free and open. Journalists began reporting on government actions and community issues without fear of punishment. This helped create transparency, meaning people could see what their leaders were doing and hold them accountable. The flow of information helped citizens feel more involved and informed. Across Togo, people started to feel more hopeful about their future. The streets were filled with new energy, shops opened, schools were busy, and families celebrated small successes. The unity shown during the revolution inspired many to work together to keep peace and progress moving forward. However, the council also faced challenges. Some people were still unhappy and demanded faster change. Others were worried about the role of the military and government. These concerns led to discussions about the importance of fully returning power to civilians as soon as possible. The council promised to respect this and set a timeline for democratic elections. International organizations and foreign countries watched closely and offered support. They sent advisors, financial aid, and resources to help Togo in this difficult time. This global support showed the world's hope for Togo's success and the importance of peaceful transitions. At the same time, many Togolese citizens stayed vigilant. They formed new groups to watch the government and encourage participation. Youth organizations grew strong, teaching leadership and civic responsibility to young people. Women's groups also became more active, pushing for equality and opportunities for all. The peaceful revolution had created a wave of hope, but the people knew the future depended on everyone working together. They understood that democracy was not just about elections, but about respect, fairness, and the right to be heard. As months passed, preparations for elections moved forward. Political parties that had been banned or silenced were allowed to organize openly. Campaigns began with lively debates and discussions, giving citizens a real choice. The elections were not perfect, but they represented a huge step toward democracy. When election day arrived, voter turnout was high. People felt that their vote could finally make a difference. The election results were accepted peacefully by most groups, marking a significant moment in Togo's history. A new civilian government was sworn in, ready to continue the work of rebuilding and uniting the nation. The military stepped back from direct control, returning to its role of protecting the country without interfering in politics. This transition was peaceful and welcomed by the people, who wanted a government that truly represented their interests. In towns and villages, the celebrations continued, but so did the hard work. New leaders faced the challenge of keeping promises and solving deep problems like poverty, education, and infrastructure. Citizens kept watching closely, holding their leaders accountable, and participating in public life. The peaceful revolution in Togo showed the power of courage, unity, and hope. The people and soldiers had come together to change their country without violence. They had chosen respect over conflict and dialogue over fear. Though many challenges remained, Togo's future was brighter than it had been for many years. The country had taken the first steps toward building a society where everyone could live with dignity, freedom, and opportunity. As the sun rose each day over Lomé and the rest of Togo, the people remembered the power they had when they stood together. The revolution was more than a moment. It was a movement that would continue to shape their lives for generations. With the peaceful revolution behind them, Togo entered a new era filled with both hope and responsibility. The people had shown incredible strength by standing up together and choosing change without violence. Now, the real work of building a fair and just country was underway, and everyone knew it would take time, patience, and cooperation. The new civilian government faced many important tasks. One of their first goals was to unite the country after years of division and struggle. Leaders traveled to towns and villages across Togo to listen to the people's concerns and hopes. They understood that trust had to be earned, and that rebuilding relationships would be key to lasting peace. Education became a priority. Schools reopened fully, and the curriculum was updated to include lessons about democracy, human rights, and peace. Teachers worked hard to inspire students and prepare them to be active citizens. For many children, this was the first time they learned about their rights and the power of their voices. This education gave young people hope and motivation to help their country grow. The government also worked on improving healthcare. Clinics and hospitals that had been damaged or neglected were repaired. Medical staff received new training, and vaccines and medicines were made available to more people. This helped reduce illnesses and gave families more security. Health programs focused on mothers and children, aiming to build a healthier future. Economically, the government faced serious challenges. Years of unrest had slowed growth, and many people lived in poverty. To address this, the government created programs to support small businesses and farmers. New roads and markets were built to help trade and connect communities. Training centers were opened to teach skills that could help people find jobs or start their own businesses. The government also encouraged young people to get involved. Youth groups organized community cleanups, educational events, and sports activities. These efforts helped create a sense of pride and responsibility. Young Togolese saw that they could make a difference not only by voting, but by working together to improve their neighborhoods. Women played a powerful role in the new Togo. After years of struggle, women's voices became stronger in politics, business, and education. Many women leaders emerged, pushing for laws that protect women's rights and promote equality. This shift helped build a more inclusive society, where everyone had a chance to succeed. Despite these positive changes, the government faced ongoing challenges. Corruption and inequality were still problems that needed to be addressed. Some people remained skeptical about how quickly things could improve. The new leaders knew they had to work hard to keep the people's trust and deliver real results. To maintain peace, the government focused on justice and reconciliation. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission continued its work, helping families heal and encouraging forgiveness. At the same time, the courts worked to hold those responsible for past abuses accountable. This balance of justice and mercy was delicate but necessary to move forward. The military returned fully to its role as protector of the nation. Soldiers received training on human rights and community service. This change helped build confidence between the army and the people. The peaceful revolution had shown that the military could be a positive force for the country's future. International partners continued to support Togo's journey. Foreign governments and organizations provided aid and advice, helping to build infrastructure, improve education, and strengthen institutions. This global support was welcomed, but the people of Togo knew that true change must come from within. As new leaders took office, they focused on building democratic institutions that would last. Free and fair elections became a regular part of Togolese life. The press remained independent, and citizens enjoyed greater freedom of speech and assembly. These democratic rights gave people the tools to hold their leaders accountable and shape the country's future. Culturally, Togo experienced a revival. Music, art, and festivals celebrated the nation's rich heritage and new hopes. Artists used their work to inspire unity and reflect the stories of the revolution. Communities came together to celebrate their diversity and common dreams. For the youth, the revolution was a story of courage and change that inspired them daily. Many young people became activists, teachers, entrepreneurs, and public servants. They carried forward the spirit of unity and peaceful change that had brought the country this far. Looking back, the peaceful revolution that forced FAURE GNASSINGBÉ to resign was more than a political event. It was a moment when an entire nation decided to change its path with hope and respect. The choice of peace over violence shaped Togo's new identity as a country committed to justice, democracy, and opportunity. The people of Togo understood that this journey was ongoing. There would be challenges ahead, but they had learned that working together with courage and patience could build a better future. The revolution was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter for a nation determined to grow and thrive. The sun set over Lomé and the towns across the country. The people looked forward to the future with hope in their hearts. The peaceful revolution had opened the door to freedom, and now it was their responsibility to walk through it and create the Togo they dreamed of, one of peace, justice, and unity for all.